Hello and welcome to this second video of Berserker Bee Meadery. Today we're going to make a little bit of an advanced type of mead called a Bochet. We're going to do a fig Bochet with a little bit of vanilla in it. But before we get there, I have to ask you guys to do something for me. Except for, commenting on my very trendy hairdo. I want you all to like this video and subscribe to this channel because there will be a lot of really good videos on how to make fantastically flavorful meads coming up very soon. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and for God's sakes, hit the little bell on the side there, because then you will be notified of next time I make a video. A Bochet is a mead where we have a caramelized honey into it, and of course this makes for a darker type of mead, very flavorful. And we will also mix in different types of flavor. Today we're going to do what's called figs and vanilla. Sorry for me stuttering, I'm still a bit of new on this, but hey, we'll see how it goes. So first thing we're going to do is look at what is the equipment that we're going to use for this mead. This equipment will be pretty much the same on whatever type of mead you're making. It is what I have as a base kit. So this is going to be our workspace more or less today. And first of all, we have the carboy where we're going to have the mead. This is 11 liter. I think that's around 2 gallons somewhere. And then there is the hydrometer. This is a meter that measures sugar content. That's going to be very important for later on when we figure out how much alcohol is going to be in the mead, in the end product. Then there is the magnetic stirrer and the glass jar that will hold the yeast and the starter culture of the yeast. I use this to aerate and to create a starter that is much more healthier than if I were to pitch it directly into the must. There are different schools of thoughts of this. Some prefer to pitch dry yeast straight into the must. I adhere to the school that uses starter more than anything else. I'll show you how we do that a little bit later on in the video. Then I have two for me, very important tools. I have the pH meter and I have a microscale. I'll link in the description where you can find these afterwards. I do this because I want to make sure that the pH of the must is in an area where the yeast likes to live. If you have too high or too low a pH, your fermentation will slow down pretty much, or it can even stop for that matter. The microscale I use to measure up how much of nutrients I will use in the must. I use nutrients on all my meads because honey alone is simply not enough. Like with everything, you want to, thrive. So putting extra nutrients in is just a very good way of making sure your yeast thrive, and therefore your mead has a better end product, really. Yeast that has to struggle throughout its fermentation process could give off flavors, these yeasty off flavor that you really don't want. And then we have our little chemical kit. What I have here is, there is GoFerm to aid the yeast in starting up. Then there is Fermade O, which is a fantastic yeast nutrient. I also have a more generic yeast nutrient from White Labs. I believe this, I think, is White Labs code. And then I have water treatment for making the water, or the must rather, come to the right window of pH. I can either de-acid it if it has too low or too high a pH. Both of these will take it up or down then. And last but not least, we have honey. This is local sourced honey. You can, of course, use any kind of honey you want. Just make sure that it is real 100% certified honey. There is a lot of fake honeys out there, and well, it just doesn't do the same. You will get an alcohol out of it, but it really won't be mead if it isn't real honey. You don't have to have organic honey, because in a lot of countries that's not really possible to certify. I mean, bees, they can travel up to 3 kilometers each way to get their honey. So it can be hard to certify whether it's organic or not. But for as long as you have certified honey, you will get a mead out of it. And since this is going to be a Bochet, caramelized mead with figs, I also need, well, figs. So I have just bought ecological, it says here, Swedish and Norwegian, soft figs. So what we're going to do is, we're not going to use that today, because I usually have that type of flavor in my secondary. So after the mead has fermented through its primaries, that means for about 2 weeks time, most of the fermentation will then be over. Then I will rack it over to a new container, and I will put these figs, 2 packages actually, in a small piece of cloth. What's it called? A cheesecloth, I think, or a I actually forgot what it's called in English, but they have it for hops bag, I think it's called, for beer. That works fantastically also in any kind of wining or mead making type. So I'm going to put these figs into one of those hops bag and put that in the secondary of the mead. All right, so I am back at my table. What we're going to do now, I'm going to go through the whole process of showing you how this mead is made. We're going to start with putting the yeast up for starting, and then we're going to brown or caramelize the honey, and then we're going to end up mixing this together. Again, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. There will be a lot of nice video coming out, and a lot of these will show you how to make mead and how to make a really good mead. The way I do this, I pretty much haven't lost a mead for a few years. So follow me and you will be set up to make a really nice mead for the future. Okay, so we're gonna make the starter for the yeast. And what I usually do is that I take my pH tester to test the water. I do this on every single batch that I make, because I live a little bit out in a rural area, and occasionally the water company does something to the water, and well, the profile changes. So in order to make sure that the water has a optimal pH, as you can see here, this is now ranging at 6.2, which is a little bit too high. I'd like it to be between 3.8 to 4.5, maybe up to 5.5 on some types of yeast. So I'm going to treat this a little bit with citric acid. Now I'm going to use very little of this, so that I can slowly bring down the pH to an area which I like. So I'll take just a tiny bit of citric acid, because you have to remember the citric acid is quite strong, and we don't want to overpower it immediately, sinking the pH under the area which I want. So I'm aiming for around 4.5 on this one. And after I have gotten the yeast going, I will also measure the must to make sure that the honey itself doesn't do anything adversely to the pH. So before we actually pitch the whole thing, I will make sure that pH is optimal for the entire brew. That is really important. So let's see here. The pH is now around 5.4. I'm giving it a little bit up and down there. The pH is around 5.4, 5.5. That's more than enough for what I want. As you can see here, 5.6 right now. That's okay. So then it's time to just pitch the water into the bottle. Like this, very simple. And I'm going to pitch the yeast into this again. This is the yeast. I actually forgot to show you that in the initial equipment or setup, but anyway, we all have to have yeast in it. I use Jack's Mead Yeast M05 for most of my meads, as it is a nice yeast that can handle most anything per se. So what we're going to do here is very simple. I'm just going to pitch it straight into the glass jar. And you see there's this little white thingy there. That's a rotator. It will start rotating when I put it on the magnetic stir. That stir will then start bringing, mixing it up and also bringing in oxygen to the mix. Will really set off the yeast. What we're going to do too now is bring in the, let's see here, bring in this one, and we're going to bring in the gopher, and we are going to help the yeast get off to the right start. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to add gopher to the water for the yeast starter, mix that in, and then we're going to pitch in the yeast. I use gopher to make sure that the yeast have the absolute best possible environment to get off to a good start, and I use the magnetic stir to make sure that it gets as much oxygen that it can handle. And that, along with the yeast nutrients, when we pitch it into the must, will ensure that we give the yeast the best chance it can to grow fast and to do their job, which is making alcohol, as well as possible with as little off flavor as we can. So according to the, what's it called? Meadmaker.com, we're supposed to have about 11 grams of gopher in this mix. And you can see here, this goes on hundreds of grams, 100 parts of grams. We're going to get this up to around 11. So it's not too easy to do this with one hand on the cell phone and one hand on everything else. So I hope you forgive me for that. And before I go on, I have to make a point, because a lot of you will make a point to me, that everything I use have been thoroughly cleaned and sprayed with Starson in order to make sure there are no bacterial problems that could arise on the later point. So we're just going to put this in here. Spilled a little bit, but that's okay. That happens. And trust me, you will have small accidents like this all the time when you're making mead. That is not a problem. So, and then I'm just going to turn this on. And as you can see, the stir will now start working its way, and it will make sure that the gopher will eventually, it will mix into the water, and after that's done, I will put in the yeast. So this is going to take a short while, and I'm not going to bore you with that. Okay, it is time to take care of the honey. Like I said, this is a Bochet, so we're going to caramelize the honey. I am going to use, for around 11 liters of must, I'm going to use just around 3.5 kilo of honey. I'm not entirely sure how much that is in pounds, but I'm guessing it's somewhere around 7 7 to 8 pounds somewhere. Perhaps any one of you guys can help me figure out how much is 3.5 kilo in pounds. Please answer that below in comments. All right, so I'm going to take this bucket. I do get my my honey in large buckets. It's far more economical. And so I'm going to take 3.5 kilos into here. I don't have the equipment to set my camera so you can see that, but that's not really a big deal. And then I'm going to move this from here and over to my stove here. And I'm going to set it to cook slowly. It's very important that you have a large cooking pan, if that's the right English words. Anyway, you see what it is. Because once this starts cooking and you start stirring it slowly, that is, it will bubble up, and it will bubble up about 4 times its original size. So you can understand that you don't want an undersized pan for this. You'd much rather have an oversized one, so that if you're a little bit too quick and it really foams up, then it won't foam over. Trust me, the last thing you want is to have 3 pounds or 3 kilos of liquid honey all over your kitchen. First of all, it's hell on earth getting out after, and next summer the ants are going to eat your house. They will find it and they will come in force. So I'm just going to get this in here and I'll be right back with you afterwards. Okay, so we ended up at 3.6 kilo or 3,600 grams. Again, not sure how much this is in pounds. You can probably help me out with that. But look at this beautiful honey down there. This is going to, well, over the time span of about an hour or two, going to get a nice golden, more golden, dark, caramelized both flavor and color, of course, and it's going to be absolutely fantastic along with the figs that are going in secondary. So, placing this on the floor and say hello to my little brew buddy, and placing this one over here. So I'm very careful not to have too high heat on this, neither starting out nor later on, because you don't want the honey to burn. That really gives off a horrible flavor, and it can absolutely ruin the mead. So in about half an hour, it's gonna start bubbling up. I will show you that, and I will show you also how this foams up. Now, as a little interlude. Don't forget to don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like, and do hit that bell button so you get a notification on every time I upload a new video. All right, so while we were doing the honey, the fermented and the mixture here has dissolved completely. So I'm now going to put in the yeast. That's an Mangrove Jack's Mead M05 yeast. Very good all over Mead yeast. And the way I do it is I first pitch it onto the solution. I leave it there for the yeast to start. And then, you generally put the cap back on it. I try to avoid having small bugs come in to ruin my day. And then now I'm going to leave this here in the jar for about half an hour until I see that it's really started up. And then I'm going to turn the magnetic stirrer on again to make sure that it gets agitated and that oxygen is frequently, mixed in. Okay. So it's a little bit later now, and as you can see, the yeast is starting to bubble up a little bit, and that tells me that it's time to make the magnetic stirrer do its job. So I'll just put this one up, and what happens now is that it will stir everything and mix in a lot of good oxygen, and the yeast will just have a party, a total rave. So in about 2-3 hours, when the honey is ready, this will now be a very healthy culture of active mead yeast. So we'll get back to that. Right, now as the honey is starting to heat up, I am preparing the carboy. This is plastic carboy, about 11 liters. I'm not sure how much in gallons that are. Perhaps you guys can help me with that. And I have had a little bit of water in it and a little bit of star san, and are going to make it do its work. That's a sterilizing kind of agent, and it's really important to keep all your equipment clean. Sorry about that. That was my sink. Again, that is also clean because yeah. Anywho, so I will agitate this, get up a lot of foam, and leave it to work, so that when we are ready to pitch everything in, then this is sterilized and no problem. The star san is not toxic. It does not kill yeast. It takes care of all other bacteria. So if you don't use that already, feel free. I do advise you to make use of it. A link to some star san will be in the description below. Okay, so now the honey is cooking, and as you can see, what was about an inch or inch and a half over the bottom floor of this pan is now a good, I don't know, 2/5, 3/5 over, almost halfway up on the sides of the pan here. And I was kind of dumb enough to leave this in, and man, is it hot. So I have to use my baking gloves to handle it. So what happens is I am now stirring this a little about, and the honey is not really happy for that. So you can see that it's kind of foaming quite a bit, a lot of small bubbles. If you get this on your fingers, it will burn. This is a lot more than 100 degrees in it, and it will instantly burn and stick to your skin, as it is honey, liquid honey, and you don't want to do that. So if you're stirring this around, do wear some kind of protection. This is my this is one of my gloves. Of course, it's star san and everything. Might look a little bit dirty, but trust me, this one is clean. I use this all the time when I make Bochets like this. I have, of course, had my accidents. Trust me, I don't want to do that again. So this has already started to get a little bit deeper color. You can see it here. I hope you can see it. And I'm going to leave it now to have fun for at least half an hour more, most likely closer to an hour. Okay, so we're back, and I wanted to show you a little bit about how I measure or gauge whether or not the cooking honey is ready and as brown as I want it. The way I do it is I start with the base, which is of course not uncooked honey, as I just use a chopstick, and I put that on a white plate like this, so that I have a point of reference. And then I go over here and do the same. I'm just gonna take away the residual honey from the chopstick. So I take a little bit of this and move it over here, and now you can see already that it's starting to get a really nice color. But this is not enough for what I'm considering. I want it quite a lot darker, so at least half an hour, probably even more, closer to an hour, and we'll take another test. So be back then. Okay, so we are back. I have had one more test in the meantime, and you see we have gone from very light brown to a medium brown, and Now I think we're quite close to where I want this one to be. It smells fantastically here. And let's see here, just mix this together so I get a good average color. And voila. Oh yes, this is a nice color. Oops. Sun. So we see here, we are certainly getting there. I will leave it on for about another 10-15 minutes, and then I will take it off the heat and leave it to rest for half an hour, I guess, before I put in some water to thin it out. Oh, would you look at that? It's an amazing color. Nice dark chocolatey kind of color here. A little bit unsure how much you can see here, but and this is just fantastic. And the smell, it's fantastic. How to say, it's not burnt by far, but it's dark, like as if this was a thick kind of coffee mix. So what I'm going to do now is I have already cooled it down a bit, so I add water to dilute the mix, otherwise it will definitely solidify a little bit later when it does get cold. And it also, you know, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have most of the water in here and measure up to about 8 liters, I guess. Again, I'm not sure how much that is in gallons. You guys can help me figure that out. And then I will let it cool down unless the cold water does the trick for me. It's important that we don't have too warm a mix when we pitch the yeast, otherwise we will kill it. I try to have my mix just around 25 degrees Celsius. 20 to 25, that's more than enough. Okay, so what we're going to do now is a very important part of the process. I have used a scoop and taken some of the now medium warm honey water into a different vessel. And what we're going to do is to go over to the yeast and start tempering the yeast. What that means is that we're going to introduce this solution of, oh wow, that really smells like a lot of yeast. We're going to introduce the solution of burnt honey or caramelized honey into the yeast so that it starts to get acclimatized to the sort of sweet solution it will live and breathe in. So we're going to do this a little bit step by step, about 1/3 at a time. I'm going to have 1/3, as I did, into the solution, into the yeast starter, and I'm going to leave it for about half an hour. I'm going to have another third into it, and after about an hour after that again, I will have the last third part into the mix. That will allow the yeast to get acclimatized and start thriving in this very specific environment that it's going to grow and make our mead. As you can see here, this is the vessel. It will be a carboy, plastic carboy. There is already a little bit of Starson in it, as I showed you before, and I keep making sure that it stays nice and sanitized before we put that in. The thing with the Starson is that once I empty the stuff in here, it's going to be a lot of foam left in it. I will leave it as is because, like I mentioned before, Starson doesn't kill yeast. It kills all the nasties we don't want, but it doesn't kill yeast. So this can stay here. I believe Starson is a protein-based type of sanitizer. That's something you guys can check out for yourself, but I swear to this, this is fantastic stuff. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to add the Fermade O. This is the yeast nutrient that is going to be instrumental in making sure our yeast has the best possible survival opportunities, and of course that they are thriving. Now I am going over here to my micro scale. For some odd reason, it keeps going, you know, down. I'm not sure why, but I'm going to have about 3 grams of this. The total should be just around 12 grams for the entire brew over 4 days. So what we're going to do, like I said, I put in just over 3 grams of Mead. That's to start it off, and then I'm going to just, oops, so I had to re-sterilize it again, and then I have to dissolve it in hot water. I'm not going to spend too much time on camera to do this. You guys have other things to do. Alright, so we have dissolved all the Mead, and I'm going to do a very quick thing. I'm just going to toss it straight into the must, because that's where it's going to end anyway. Stir it about so that when the yeast is pitched later on, it comes to a complete paradise of nutrients and sugar and everything it would love to have to really thrive here. Now, I'm going to make a point out of one thing. I haven't measured the sugar yet, and that is because I tend to adjust that after I have put it in the carboy. Alternately, I can adjust it as I go along during fermentation. The reason for that is that I like to have control, and I'd rather sometimes start with a lower sweetness, lower original gravity, and make sure that the yeast takes off, than to potentially start off at a higher gravity and see the yeast struggle. Something, you know, that I don't like is to have to go back and correct mistakes, especially in the starting phase of fermentation. All right, so we are back, and the yeast has now fully done its thing. It is ready to be pitched, but the must is still a little bit too warm for my comfort. So what I'm going to do now is to put it over here in the carboy, and I will also let some water flow around here in the sink to make it colder and to reach the temperature that is best for the yeast. A little bit, how to say, I don't have a funnel for it, so I'll just literally try and see what happens on this. You know, we gotta work with what we have. Let's see here. That's not too bad. And also, I'm also aerating, sort of pushing oxygen into the must as I do it like that. Coming to aeration, I will show a little bit later. I have a aquarium pump, air pump, with a stainless steel air stone that I will be putting in here to make sure that as much oxygen gets into the must as I can. So what we see here is that we are way over 1.12. So I'm going to put in even more water into the carboy to sink it down to about 1.1 or 110 on this. Let's see if I can get it. Yeah, there we go. I should have it around 1.10 or 110 on this gauge, on this hydrometer. That will give a fairly good sugar content and more than enough for the yeast to survive and thrive. So this is pretty simple. I'll just take off the tap here and put more water in it. And where I live, it's pretty good water, so I don't have to sterilize it up front. You guys might have different water qualities where you are, so I would suggest that before you start anything, get a water quality report from the local county, whoever deals with your water. So So I have now filled up a few more liters of water and to dilute the sugar content. And I'm just going to stir it around a bit to make sure that it is homogeneous in the carboy. Alright, we're back and I am now measuring this again. Not sure if you can see this completely, but we are at a healthy, let's see here. You can get something better on that one, but we are around a good, just a tiny bit over 110. And once I get the yeast mix into it, it should be perfect as it is. So what we're going to do now is just going to let this cool down even a bit more. And then we're going to pitch the yeast start. All right, so what we're going to do now while the must is cooling down a bit is to add oxygen in the whole thing. I have here a good old-fashioned aquarium pump, which I have repurposed for my use. It's quite simple. I just put it on, it starts, and I'll put the air stone, this one, as you can see, it's been fixed with stars on, and I'll just put it straight in, and it will put oxygen into the must for about a half an hour, I'd say, maybe an hour. So I will leave it here, and I can now see that it is bubbling nicely in here. Okay, my friends, so the concoction here has been aerating for quite some time now. As you can see, I'm just adjusting the camera a bit. It's quite foamy, so I'd say it's well ready now for pitching the yeast. However, this foam here could turn into a bit of a let's call it volcano later on when the yeast really gets going. So what I've done is, or what I'm going to do rather, I am going to put a little bit of antifoam onto it to make sure that this can still do its job, but I won't have to be afraid of this stuff completely turning into a sugar bomb. I was just down at the brewery shop because I ran out of antifoam, this stuff here. Not sure if you can see it properly. What I got is a pretty thick goo. I'm not sure exactly how to do this. I think I'll just take a little bit of water and dissolve it in that. I'll just put this in here. And I'm not sure if you can see this, but wow, this works like a charm. And just like that, all the bubbles all the foam is gone. So this will make it a lot easier for me now to control, just, control not getting this foam eruption volcano, whatever you want to call it. All right, it's time to get the yeast. As you can see here, the yeast is now very nice and lively. So this is a good time to get it going. Just gonna fish out the aerator. Place it next here. And I can hear it buzzing down here. That's a very good thing. Let's see here. I'm just gonna be careful now here so I don't accidentally get the stirrer in the brew here. That's bad for my next video. So it has been this has been a yeast starter that's been going on for, in reality, 5 or 6 hours now. So there is more than enough yeast to handle this batch. And so it's off to a really good start. Okay, I'll stop it there. I'll save the stir in a second. So what we're going to do then, just going to whisk this around. And that, my friends, is all I need to do with this mead. Now it's going to I'm going to put that up in my little brewing room. I'm not going to show you that. It's pretty overfilled. Ask my wife. Actually, don't ask my wife. And tomorrow this will be good and going, and I'm going to degas it. I'm going to stir it up using some spoons that I have on a drill, really. And I'm going to remeasure the sugar content. If it has dropped enough, then I will give it some more nutrients, and same again for another 4 times, most likely during the next 72 hours. So when we're down to about 1/3 of the residual sugar content, that's when I will put in the last quarter of the nutrients. Remember I mentioned we had about 12 grams in total ready for this batch. So I'll be giving another 3 grams and another 3 grams, and when the sugar content is down on around 1/3 or within 72 hours, then I will be putting in the rest of the nutrients. So this is what's called the staggered nutrition method, TOSNA 2.0. Feel free to look it up, otherwise I will also put a link to that in the description. I hope you like what you have seen here. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have learned a lot. Please do hit the like button. It does matter. Do subscribe to my channel. There's a lot of good content coming out very soon. And I hope you will learn how to make good mead very simplistic through me. Have a fantastic day onward.